At this time, I'd like to welcome up representatives from the Community Coalition on Race. They have a brief presentation for us.
Good evening. My name is Leila Gonzalez Sullivan, and I'm one of the vice chairs for the Community Coalition on Race. We're here tonight to share with you a resolution that the coalition passed recently, and which we've also presented to the town of Maplewood. I'm going to read the resolution, and then I'd like our executive director, Nancy Gagne, to provide some details, and we'll be happy to answer questions. Our resolution reads, "Be it resolved that the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, that the events which occurred," helps not to use the glasses, "the events which occurred in Ferguson, Missouri have been deeply troubling to all people of goodwill in this country. The South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race finds these events to be particularly disturbing because they represent precisely the type of racial injustice that we find to be enormously offensive and which we have fought so hard to counter since the time of our inception. Because Maplewood and South Orange are communities which aspire to be places where the events in Ferguson would never occur, the Coalition requests that the South Orange Board of Trustees and the Maplewood Township Committee adopt resolutions which condemn the killing of an unarmed black male teenager and the militaristic overreaction of the Ferguson police force to the public protest in violation of the Constitution's First Amendment guarantees."
So I just want to, hi, I'm Nancy Gagne. I'm struggling with the glasses too. Some background on the thinking that went into the resolution. We talked a lot about this at the trustee level at a number of board meetings, and the trustees have considered specific responses to incidents in other communities across the nation that involved individual or community practices like racial profiling. We certainly talked about the Trayvon Martin case, Jordan Davis, Oscar Grant, just to name a few of the tragedies that we faced as a nation. And these incidents have given rise to national responses to profiling and things like explicit bias, implicit bias, and broad systemic forms of racism. And the conversations that we've had as a board about these incidents have produced ideas for forums and community conversations that are relevant to our needs here in South Orange and Maplewood. In fact, our recent conversations on race last spring, we focused on the issue of implicit bias, and that's one example of how we've tried to be proactive. So some of the trustees and some people in the community have asked why the specific response to the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson. The more we learned about Ferguson and the more we thought about it, we saw that the fact is that Ferguson is a racially diverse but not integrated community, a community with leadership that is not racially representative, that has what some have called intentionally segregated schools by virtue of how the boundaries are drawn, and a community whose economy is oftentimes dependent on fines that that burden the black population unfairly. There are things to compare and big differences to be drawn between the two communities. But we're a community that knows firsthand that those situations are potential perils of a diverse community unless there are race-conscious strategies in place to counteract those segregative forces. So what happened to Michael Brown and what happened within that community afterwards really hit home for us. And we know that racial instability is the pattern for communities that experience demographic change, as Ferguson did, and as we know our community did just 25 years ago, unless there are pro-integrative strategies in place. Most communities, we can see lots of examples across the country, are reactive rather than proactive on race issues. And in the case of Ferguson, it was really brought into painfully greater relief. And those strategies, by the way, include things like integrated schools with policies and practices that ensure equity for all students, fair housing ordinances, fair lending practices, neighborhood associations, representative leadership in government and civic organizations, activities that support an integration culture that allow people to build relationships across racial and cultural divides, honest conversations about race, and staffing that is inclusive and diverse in community organizations. So this is the kind of work that we do, and we just want to speak to the issue of Ferguson. I attended a panel on the root causes, well, that's what they purported to address, of Ferguson, that included the Democratic Township Committee woman, Patricia Bynes. She's an African-American woman who serves in a mostly white local government. And at this panel, she placed special emphasis on the problems of the lack of representative leadership, the economic incentives of police to give fines, and the need to address systemic racism in the community. And I'm going to quote her here. This is what she said that morning. "We're going to get the conversation about racism out there. The business community needs to address it. The politicians need to address it. We all need to address it." We think we're doing that here, and we want to just keep you on board with that. The last thing I want to add is that next week we are hosting a Two Towns, One Book event with Professor David Trout. It will be at the Woodland in Maplewood. That's Tuesday, November 19th at 7:30. You don't have to have read the book to come and learn quite a bit. It's a great book. It's called The Price of Paradise. He's some of you may know he's a professor at Rutgers. The book really speaks directly to communities like ours and the question of access and opportunity in metropolitan centers, urban centers, and their surrounding suburbs. I think he has a lot to say to us in Maplewood and South Orange. He lives in Montclair. He knows us well. So I hope you'll come out and hear what he has to say, and then you'll have an opportunity to talk with other residents. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do folks want to have a conversation now while they're here to be able to answer some questions, or do you want to add it for later in the meeting and discuss? Do you have a preference, one way or the other?
Either one.
Okay. Well, I can start because I have an ask at the end of my comments, and these were some comments that were expressed over email to the Community Coalition on Race when we got this as well. And my reaction, although I appreciate the effort at addressing what's a very serious problem, I was very disappointed in this resolution. On one hand, some of the background is helpful as far as understanding why this particular incident was kind of picked out to be used, but on the other hand, there are quite a number of other incidents, not only like this, but just in general, that seem worthwhile talking about as well. And one of the things that I feel like I notice more and more these days is people reacting to tragedies in a way where we tend to focus very much on the story of one particular tragedy, and we forget to really reconcile with some of the more root causes that you did mention just a moment ago. And so that that the specificity of this one incident was something that struck me as problematic. In addition to that, there were other issues around this incident that should probably be addressed as well that are related to this issue, having to do with surplus military equipment, being made available in a way that our tax dollars are funding, and that probably most folks who pay taxes would not particularly be supportive of, and that there's an entire system in place to encourage the trickle down of military equipment for non-military situations, and that there were also other law enforcement agencies outside of just the Ferguson Police Department, which is the only law enforcement agency named in the resolution, that were both problematic and in a very small dose at one particular temporary point, seemingly helpful, but that the specificity of only looking at one law enforcement agency, to me, was also problematic. As well as if we're going to take a stand on an issue like this, the resolution doesn't really do a service to the Community Coalition on Race, and it doesn't really do a service to this community because it's a very sort of generic reaction to something. It doesn't really address that, this is an issue that we have grappled with in this community for decades and done, what I think we would all agree is an incredibly almost revolutionary job at being better than most. And so I would hate to undermine all the effort and energy that's been put in over the past couple decades of people working on this by making a very broad and general kind of statement. It's very easy, I think, to condemn a tragedy. I think it's a little bit harder to figure out what to do. And so I know for me personally, I would appreciate and would have appreciated the opportunity for us to be more involved with working with you in figuring out how best we can respond either as a governing body, as a village government, as a community, just as citizens. And to me, this resolution doesn't do enough. And in not doing enough, it seems to me to do a disservice to the issue, because it's not unreasonable, I think, to react to that issue in the way that this resolution sort of proposes, but it's also not complete. And I'd like that if we were to formally engage with this issue and make a statement about it, that we do so in a way that is more complete, that understands the unique history of this community, our unique efforts in this community as a village and as a police department, to build trust between our police department and our citizens, and to create community policing programs that I think we found to be very effective. And so all of that being said, my ask would be that we do something better than this, that we do something more complete than this, that we do something that takes into account some of the different issues that I just brought up, and maybe any of the other concerns that any other governing body members have, and sit down and, if we're going to do it, do something that brings it all together, that meets those issues and talks about what we're going to do as not just a community here in South Orange, but as two communities, what we're going to do so that something like that, A, doesn't happen in these communities, and B, that we can do whatever we can to make sure it doesn't happen elsewhere. And I think the only way that we can make any significant mark in doing that would be to address the issue a little bit more deliberatively and comprehensively, which I know I would personally be happy to do, and I would think that anybody sitting up here would be happy to spend as much time as needed to be able to do as well.
If I can just quickly respond, we wanted to use this resolution, and there were differences of opinion among our board members as well, how to phrase this sort of thing, why were we doing it right now and about this particular incident rather than the others. But I really do agree with you that this is an opportunity for the two towns and the coalition as one of your organizations to do something more. And so our hope was that by presenting the resolution, it would be a kind of a trigger for us then to look more deeply and to come up with a broader, or not, maybe not broader since this was very broad, but with a more a clearer response and a clearer statement of intention, if you will, that all of us in the two towns and in the coalition can really get on board with and work towards something that really makes it clear that we want to be different, and that's our firm intention.
If I could chime in, I want to thank you both for coming out tonight and for presenting this. I guess I'm in agreement with Alex in that I see the resolution as a largely symbolic act, but I also think we are very fortunate in the fact that we have a community coalition on race to which we can turn to begin a discussion of more substantive recipes, if we can speak in such terms, for success in this area. I think, unfortunately, there are many events which you could point to and have a very similar resolution, far too many. And while I don't think any community is immune in any way, I do feel thankful and that our community, frankly, has some inoculation against these things, one of which is the existence of the Community Coalition on Race, something which does not exist in a number of other communities. And additionally, I would just want to make a shout out to our police department, because I know they've been doing some community outreach efforts, and that I wouldn't want this to be seen as any kind of a preemptive knock against our police department. We have been fortunate that we haven't had issues like that. But again, I think the fact that these two, both the police in their community outreach and the Community Coalition on Race and the work that you do provide us with some inoculation. And I would also like to be involved in working together with you to try to come up with some prescriptives that we can do that are tailored particularly to our community going forward.
I'd like to say I'd like to be at that table. I want to thank our village president for articulating so clearly that we need to look at a holistic approach, and at the same time recognize some of the great work that the two communities have done. As we often state, there are many communities that claim to be diverse, meaning that they have one ethnic group and another, but they're segregated. This is one of the few communities that I know that every economic demographic that exists here is fully integrated in its work. The most important, it is so easy to ignore the elephant in the room, and what your organization allows for us to do is to have that discussion, because people avoid it, they're uncomfortable with it, and when you avoid it and uncomfortable with the important discussions that need to be had to air issues or to come up with solutions don't happen, and that creates an environment for misunderstanding and misreading people's positions, intentions, or actions. So I want to commend you for bringing this to start a conversation, but I agree with my colleague here and the president that it's not good enough, and I want to be at that table.
Well, I want to thank you, and just to end by saying, unless there are other questions, that we think there is power in the symbolic gesture as long as there's something backing it up, and we do believe that the Community Coalition, along with some other efforts in the two towns, are the things that stand behind the statement and the work that we do. But we're very open to more activities, programming, and conversations that speak to the issues that are in the resolution.
Just a quick question. Has Maplewood, I know you made a presentation to the Maplewood Township Committee, have they reintroduced a resolution? I know they had, I think, tabled it, or they were going to draft something similar.
They wanted to draft their own words, and I probably should have said at the outset that Fred Perfetta, who's been our chair but is inactive at the moment, he really put the resolution together and was a bit of the driving force behind it. He really saw this as the opportunity to begin a conversation and as suggested wording, but not necessarily the resolution that you should pass, but that you should be, as your own deliberative body, have your own conversation. And that's exactly what Maplewood seems to be doing. They were receptive to the idea, thanked us, and said that they would be talking more about it. And that was it.
I'd also suggest that in crafting whatever resolution that the group lands on, that we do it together with South Orange and Maplewood, a joint resolution. And I do echo what Walter, Deborah, and Alex said. And just one additional concern that I've had as chair of the Public Safety Committee, I watch on the news and I see on Facebook and Twitter this almost growing anti-police sentiment where people are cropping videos, showing police brutality. And I think we need to come up with a way to address that also, because I'm very proud of our police department. I see the relationship every day, how they interact with our community. great community relations officer, their response to all the people who live in both South Orange and then Maplewood, and a way to tie this resolution into the overall policing that we have in these two towns, where I think we really have dedicated officers who understand our commitment to diversity, integration, treating people with respect. So if the CCR can also try and figure out a way that we can do that better and involve our departments, because I know how important the relationship, especially with youth,
Yes.
And our police department is, I would really, really appreciate that.
All right, we'll bring that. We have certainly had that conversation at the trustee level, and we'll have it again. We'll take
I'll
that
say,
back.
the first thing I said to Alex, I think, via an email, was, we have to keep it local, these kind of resolutions. And, and to Sheena's point, we have a police force that's worked very hard to build a community. And if you look back a few years ago, and I guess it's 4 or 5 years ago, when we had some trouble with teenagers in the downtown, most of whom were black, the police handled it very well in a nonviolent way. And despite despite some objections to some people that we didn't go far enough and arrest him, but we actually brought it under control in a very peaceful way. And, part of like the downtown after sundown concerts to help bring the people back to town, and it worked very successfully. And I think those are positives. I'd rather see that in the resolution than a negative about some other town.
Right.
And in fact, I wouldn't mention the other town at all. I would just say we're anti-police brutality or something. I just don't think it's necessary to single out one town, because it really takes away from the overall resolution, in my opinion.
Thank you.
So it seems like, I think it's fair to say that I can speak for everyone here that, one of the things that, we look to from the Community Coalition on Race is guidance here. And though we appreciate this being brought to our attention as far as starting the conversation, just sort of from an almost, process perspective, I know that you guys spent a fair amount of time discussing this resolution before it got to the point where it was. And I think in the future, we're more open, we're completely open to being as integrated of a partner in talking about these things as possible. Especially something like this where, like some trustees have said, it seems like it might make the most sense to do something joint between South Orange and Maplewood. I don't think you're going to have anyone, sitting here who wouldn't be happy to volunteer to talk about, how we do that, how we highlight the, incredible job, that we've tried to do, with our police department and the commitment of all the individual officers for doing that, all the incredible work that the Community Coalition on Race has done in the past, and all the different community groups that have worked on this. So, it sounds like sort of the takeaway here is that I think would be fair to say is that you guys should let us know how you want us to be involved in this process, and we're all willing to do that. But we're certainly interested in your guidance and your leadership in doing this, and we'll be right there with you. But if you can help coordinate that effort between both the towns and create a conversation where we feel like we can all, put some ideas down at the table and get something that our communities will not only be supportive of, but will actually make a difference. And we'll actually set an example, which is, I think, the best thing that we can do, is tell our story of our South Orange and Maplewood story to other places and let people know that, it can be done the right way.
Yeah.
So I think we'll look to you to provide us with those next steps. And I know I certainly appreciate, and I think everybody appreciates, all of the work that you guys have done, and the intention and interest and desire in expressing these thoughts in a productive way that brought you here today.
Yeah. Thank you. We will take it back to our trustees for further conversation and come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Great,
Thank you again.
Thank you.